In the year 2476, the Earth had long been under the control of the Syndicate, an oppressive alliance of powerful galactic empires. They viewed humanity as little more than a primitive species, unworthy of any true respect or autonomy. The Syndicate, consisting of cold-blooded alien warlords, had subjugated countless planets, but Earth was different. They hadn't anticipated the tenacity of its people. For decades, humans had been forced to comply with the Syndicate's harsh laws. The Earth's resources were harvested, its people exploited, and any form of resistance brutally crushed. Despite the overwhelming power of the Syndicate, a spark had ignited within the heart of humanity, and it was slowly but surely spreading. It began with a small, seemingly insignificant group of rebels, a ragtag fleet of Earth's finest soldiers, engineers, and civilians. They called themselves the Resilience, and their goal was simple: to reclaim Earth from its captors. It was a quiet rebellion at first, no more than an itch that the Syndicate could dismiss. But the humans were smarter, more resourceful, and most importantly, unpredictable. The spark came when an intercepted message from the Syndicate's leaders revealed a devastating plan. Earth, the cradle of humanity, was slated for complete destruction. The Syndicate's fleet would bombard Earth with a weapon of unimaginable power, one capable of annihilating all life on the planet in mere hours. The message was intended for the high-ranking officials of the Syndicate, but a lone human hacker, known only as Sable, managed to break through the encryption and expose the truth to the public. The news spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a military operation anymore, it was personal. The Earth was in peril, and the entire human race stood on the precipice of extinction. But in that moment of despair, something remarkable happened. Humanity's greatest strength was unleashed, its unity. The Resilience, with the help of former soldiers, engineers, scientists, and civilians who had lived under the Syndicate's boot for too long, launched a desperate, coordinated strike to rally the people of Earth. The rebellion was no longer just a handful of individuals hiding in the shadows. It was a movement that resonated with every human who had ever felt the sting of oppression. In the heart of the capital city, where the Syndicate's bureaucrats and overseers lived in opulence while the people suffered, the first shots were fired. A small faction of the Resilience, led by Commander Alara Voss, stormed the central communications tower, broadcasting the intercepted message to every corner of Earth. The Syndicate had no idea the rebellion had gained such momentum, nor did they realize how far-reaching the consequences of that broadcast would be. With the Syndicate's plan now in the open, humanity's resolve hardened. The once disorganized cells of resistance now rallied together. Small skirmishes erupted across the world as Earth's people rose against their oppressors. The Syndicate responded with violence, sending their fleets to crush the rebellion, but the humans were prepared. They had been waiting for this moment for generations. As Earth's skies darkened with the arrival of alien warships, the first battle of humanity's defiance began. The Earth's military, long suppressed, took up arms once more. They called upon every ounce of ingenuity, every forgotten weapon, every ancient artifact of war. The Syndicate's arrogance, which had made them dismiss humanity as a weak species, now became their greatest downfall. But it wasn't just technology or firepower that made the humans dangerous, it was their will to survive. When the first bombs fell, the people of Earth did not cower. They fought back with a ferocity that left the Syndicate stunned. Humanity, once thought to be on the brink of extinction, stood tall. The Syndicate had miscalculated, thinking that they could extinguish a species that had survived against all odds for centuries. What they didn't understand was that humanity didn't just survive. It adapted, it learned, and most importantly, it fought with a purpose that no alien race could comprehend. As the first skirmishes turned into full-scale battles, the people of Earth realized something profound: they had underestimated themselves. And so, the day began. The day humanity took its stand and defied the Galactic Overlords who had once thought them inconsequential. It was the spark of something greater than a rebellion, it was the beginning of a revolution. The first day of resistance had awakened something deep within humanity. The Syndicate's confidence began to crack, their belief that Earth was nothing more than a backward, broken world slowly crumbling. But as much as humanity had risen, they were still facing insurmountable odds. The Syndicate's forces were vast, and they had advanced technology far beyond what Earth could ever hope to replicate, yet it wasn't their weapons that the humans feared most. It was the indomitable will of their enemies. The Syndicate was a coalition of ruthless warlords, each with their own agendas, but united under one banner: control. Their fleets were commanded by beings of immense power, and their war machines had long been the pinnacle of galactic domination. The Syndicate was used to swift, overwhelming victories. Nothing in their history had prepared them for a people who fought for more than survival. They fought for their home. As the war began to spread across Earth, the Resilients found themselves increasingly reliant on the cleverness and ingenuity of humanity rather than brute force. Commander Ilara Voss and her second-in-command, Captain Zane Calloway, understood this better than anyone. They had no illusions that a direct confrontation with the Syndicate's military might would end in humanity's extinction. Instead, they had to outsmart their enemies. One of the first victories in this unconventional warfare came when they managed to hack into a Syndicate communications relay, stealing vital intelligence about their upcoming assault on a major Earth city. With the help of a network of underground hackers, the Resilients launched a counteroffensive, turning the Syndicate's own technology against them. This wasn't a war of sheer firepower. It was a battle of wits. Ilara stood before her crew in the underground command center, a reinforced bunker hidden deep in the mountains. The holographic map of Earth's battlefront flickered in front of her, showing the Syndicate's movements as they advanced across the globe. "We don't have much time," Ilara said, her voice steady but urgent. "Their fleet is closing in. We know their weaknesses now. It's time to hit them where it hurts." Zane stood beside her, his expression grim but resolute. "We've been fighting this war for weeks, Commander. But the Syndicate won't stop until they've destroyed every last one of us." Ilara nodded, but her eyes gleamed with something else: hope. "They'll stop when they realize that we are not the same people they thought we were. We've already shown them that we can hurt them. Now, we show them that we can win." The Resilients had gathered intel about the Syndicate's most powerful asset, a warship known as Eclipse. A ship so massive, it was capable of wiping out entire cities with a single strike. It was the centerpiece of their forces, a symbol of the Syndicate's dominance. The Eclipse had been stationed in orbit above Earth, its massive guns trained on the planet, ready to wipe out entire populations. The Syndicate believed that with the Eclipse at their disposal, humanity's rebellion would be crushed before it could truly take flight. But Ilara had a different plan. She knew that a direct assault on the Eclipse was impossible, but it wasn't invulnerable. Deep within the Syndicate's operations, a small crack had formed in their communication systems. The Resilients had intercepted messages, showing that Eclipse was vulnerable to a high-powered electromagnetic pulse, a technology that Earth had been developing in secret for decades. The plan was set. It wasn't just a battle, it was a heist. Ilara and her crew would infiltrate a Syndicate facility deep in enemy territory and steal the necessary components to deploy an EMP strike that would disable the Eclipse's shields and communication systems. The clock was ticking, and they had only one shot. As Ilara and Zane prepared to launch their mission, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the stakes. If they failed, it would mean the end of the rebellion. But if they succeeded, they would have the means to cripple the Syndicate's most powerful weapon and level the playing field. On the eve of their mission, Ilara stood alone on the observation deck of the command center, staring out at the stars. For the first time since the war began, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. "Do you think we can really win this?" Zane's voice interrupted her thoughts. Ilara turned to face him. "I don't know. But I know that if we don't try, we'll never know." Zane's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make them regret ever thinking they could control us." And so, the winds of war began to shift. The Syndicate may have underestimated humanity once, but they were about to learn the hard way that Earth's people were far from the fragile, defeated species they thought them to be. They were, in fact, the very thing the Syndicate feared most, a force of nature, unstoppable in their resolve, and willing to fight for their home at any cost. the night was alive with tension as the Resilience's most daring mission yet began. Ilara Voss, Captain Zane Calloway, and a hand-picked team of elite operatives boarded the stealth ship Vanguard. Their objective was simple, though its execution would be anything but. They had to infiltrate a heavily fortified Syndicate base on the moon of a nearby gas giant, retrieve the electromagnetic pulse technology, and escape undetected. It was a mission with a high risk of failure, but the stakes were clear. If they succeeded, they would have a chance to neutralize the Eclipse, the Syndicate's most potent weapon. The Vanguard cut through the darkness of space like a shadow, its engines humming quietly as it approached the moon's orbit. Inside, the crew was silent, each person focused on the task ahead. They were no strangers to danger, but tonight, the weight of their mission felt heavier than ever. Approaching the target zone, Zane's voice crackled over the comms. "We'll have to move fast. The Syndicate's patrols will be circling the area." Ilara nodded, her face set with determination. "We can't afford to waste time. Once we're on the ground, we split into 2 teams. Zane, you'll take the East Wing with Lieutenant Darkos. I'll lead the West Wing with Sergeant Lee. We rendezvous at the facility's core." As the ship descended into the moon's barren surface, the teams suited up, each member a mixture of anxiety and adrenaline. They knew that the Syndicate's presence was strong on the moon, with enough firepower to wipe out an entire battalion if they were discovered. Their only advantage was the element of surprise and the cutting-edge stealth technology embedded in the Vanguard. They landed a few miles from the facility, an enormous compound shielded by thick walls of reinforced metal and a network of turrets and automated defenses. The moment the ship's engines powered down, the team sprang into action, quickly making their way across the rugged terrain, using their environment to stay out of sight. Zane's team approached from the east side, navigating the darkened landscape with the precision of well-trained soldiers. Meanwhile, Ilara's team advanced from the west, their steps muffled by the soft dust beneath their boots. Their goal was clear: get inside, retrieve the EMP device, and leave before the Syndicate could react. They were only 100 yards from the facility's outer walls when the first alarm sounded. A sharp, mechanical screech tore through the stillness of the night, signaling that their presence had been detected. A flood of adrenaline surged through Ilara's veins as she turned to her team. "Move, now!" They sprinted for the compound, ducking under the first volley of gunfire from a nearby turret. The Syndicate had a vast array of automated defenses, and they were beginning to come online. The next few minutes would determine their success or failure. As Zane and his team approached the East Wing, they were met with resistance, 2 Syndicate guards armed with plasma rifles. Without missing a beat, Zane's team opened fire. The firefight was short but intense, and within moments, the guards were neutralized. Zane signaled for his team to push forward. Meanwhile, Ilara's team reached the western entrance, a secure hatch buried beneath layers of steel. Sergeant Lee worked swiftly with the hacking tools, overriding the locks as Ilara kept a watchful eye on the surrounding area. The seconds stretched like hours as the sound of distant patrols echoed in the distance. "Got it," Lee said, his voice low and steady. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the cold, dimly lit interior of the Syndicate facility. The team slipped inside, moving quickly through the corridors, relying on their training to remain undetected. They knew the EMP device was housed deep within the facility, behind multiple security layers, but they were well prepared. They had anticipated the challenge. "Stay sharp," Ilara warned as they reached the central chamber. The EMP device was located in the heart of the facility, a room that was heavily guarded. Ilara's heart beat faster as they neared their goal. The air was thick with tension, and the faint hum of Syndicate energy shields could be heard vibrating in the walls. Just as they rounded a corner, a group of Syndicate soldiers appeared in the hallway ahead. Without hesitation, Zane's team moved into position, weapons raised. "Hold," Ilara whispered, her breath shallow. They waited, muscles tense, as the soldiers walked closer, oblivious to the imminent threat. At the last possible moment, Ilara nodded. Zane and Lieutenant Darkos opened fire, incapacitating the soldiers before they even had a chance to react. The hallway fell silent, and the team continued forward, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Inside the central chamber, the EMP device sat in the center of a room filled with complex machinery. It was massive, a cluster of coils and conduits, pulsing with energy. It was the Syndicate's greatest technological achievement, capable of disrupting entire fleets with a single pulse. Elara approached the device with reverence. This wasn't just a victory, it was the key to turning the tide of the war. Let's move, now. With the EMP device in hand, they began their retreat. However, as they neared the exit, a massive explosion rocked the facility, signaling that the Syndicate had been alerted to their presence. The entire compound went into lockdown. The clock was ticking, and there was no turning back now. The Resilients had made their move, but the Syndicate would not let them escape easily. This was the moment that would define the rebellion, a chance to strike a crippling blow to the Syndicate's grip on Earth. But as Elara led her team back toward the ship, she knew one thing: there was no going back from here. The war was just beginning. The Vanguard blasted off from the moon's surface, its engines roaring to life as the team raced to escape the Syndicate's wrath. The EMP device, now safely stored aboard the ship, was humanity's most potent weapon. But as the moon's surface disappeared into the vastness of space behind them, Elara Voss knew that their success had come at a price. The Syndicate would not let this act of defiance go unanswered. They would send everything they had to crush the humans' fledgling rebellion. The space around them was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. The Vanguard's hull shuddered as the ship's stealth systems kicked into high gear, cloaking them from the Syndicate's sensors. Elara's voice was calm, though her mind raced with possibilities. Zane, set course for the rendezvous point. We need to get back to Earth before they find us. The eclipse won't be far behind. Zane nodded grimly, adjusting the course on the navigation panel. The Vanguard cut through the darkness, but in the vast expanse of space, even stealth technology could only provide so much protection. The Syndicate's fleets, including the feared eclipse, would be coming for them, and they knew the escape wouldn't be easy. As they neared Earth, a sudden blare of alarms erupted throughout the ship. Alert, the ship's computer called out. Hostile ships detected. Multiple signatures inbound. Elara's heart sank as she glanced at the scanner. The Eclipse was not the only ship closing in on their position. A full Syndicate fleet, numbering over 30 warships, was emerging from a nearby asteroid field. They had been waiting for this moment, anticipating humanity's move, and now they were prepared to annihilate them. We're not making it out of this without a fight, Zane muttered under his breath, his hands flying over the controls. Then we make it count, Elara replied. Her voice was steel, resolute. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Bring up the EMP. The Vanguard was designed for stealth and speed, but facing an entire fleet of Syndicate warships was a different story. Elara knew that they had no hope of outrunning the fleet, not with the Eclipse in pursuit. They needed to buy time, and the EMP was their only weapon capable of leveling the playing field. The team huddled in the ship's cockpit, watching as the enemy ships closed in. There was no way to avoid detection now. The Syndicate had seen them. Within moments, powerful beams of energy fired from the Syndicate's warships, cutting through the void. Brace for impact. Zane shouted, pulling the ship into a steep dive. A blast of energy hit the Vanguard, sending the ship tumbling through space. The hull groaned under the pressure, and alarms blared as the ship's shields flickered dangerously. We've taken a hit to the port side, shouted Lieutenant Darkos from the weapons console. Shields at 40%. The Vanguard rocked again, another blast slamming into the ship's rear. Elara gritted her teeth and grabbed the helm, her knuckles white with tension. Deploy the EMP, she commanded, her eyes fixed on the target. Zane's hands moved quickly, activating the device. The ship's core hummed with energy as the EMP was released. A massive pulse of electromagnetic energy erupted from the ship's core, spreading outward like a shockwave. For a moment, everything went still. Then, the explosions began. The Syndicate fleet had been relying on their advanced shield systems to protect them from attack. But the EMP had shattered their electronic defenses, disabling their ships in a single, devastating blow. The enemy fleet staggered, disoriented, and crippled by the sudden loss of power. The Eclipse was among those affected, its enormous shields flickering out, leaving it vulnerable. The Vanguard's crew couldn't believe their eyes. They had done it, they had struck a blow that would reverberate across the galaxy. But the respite was brief. The Syndicate's commanders, enraged by the loss of their superiority, quickly re-established control. They had other weapons, advanced, devastating weapons that would prove humanity's greatest challenge yet. The Eclipse is recharging its weapons, Darkos warned, her voice tight with urgency. They're going to fire. Elara cursed under her breath, glancing at the countdown ticking down on the ship's display. The Eclipse was preparing to launch a massive ion cannon that could tear the Vanguard apart in a single shot. "Get us out of here, Zane!" Elara shouted. Zane's fingers flew over the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. The Vanguard veered, dodging the incoming blasts by mere inches. The Eclipse's ion cannon fired, the powerful beam sizzling through the empty space just behind them. But the Vanguard was faster, narrowly escaping destruction. Not yet," Zane muttered, sweating with concentration. "We can't outrun that thing forever." "We don't need to outrun it," Elara said, a fire burning in her eyes. "We just need to keep it occupied. If we can get close enough, we can disable the Eclipse's weapon systems. It'll take everything we've got, but it's our only chance." The crew knew what they had to do. They were heading straight for the heart of the Syndicate's flagship. This was no longer about survival, it was about winning. And if they could take down the Eclipse, they could cripple the Syndicate's entire fleet. The time for evasion was over. This would be the final stand. And humanity was ready to show the Syndicate just how wrong they were about them. The Vanguard raced toward the Eclipse, dodging another barrage of ion cannon fire that left ripples in the fabric of space behind them. Elara's pulse quickened as she watched the massive warship grow larger on the viewscreen. The stakes were higher than ever. This was humanity's last chance to deal a crippling blow to the Syndicate and secure their future among the stars. "Captain, we're running out of time." Zane's voice was tense, his grip tight on the controls. "The Eclipse is going to fire again in 5 seconds. If we don't make it through that firestorm, we'll never get another shot." Elara nodded, her face hard with resolve. The Eclipse's weapons were devastating, and if they didn't disable its ion cannon now, they would never get another chance. "We're going in fast." "Full speed ahead, Zane," she ordered. The ship's engines roared as the Vanguard accelerated, racing toward the Eclipse with a velocity that seemed almost reckless. They were within weapons range now, and the Syndicate flagship's massive cannons were preparing to unleash their fury. Every second counted. "Incoming!" Lieutenant Darkos shouted, her eyes locked on the scanner. "They're charging up again. If we don't get through this, we're toast." Elara gritted her teeth. "We won't go down without a fight." The Vanguard plunged into the heart of the enemy fleet, weaving between the wrecked ships still struggling to regain control after the EMP blast. But the Eclipse was closing in, its massive, jagged silhouette looming before them. The moment of truth had arrived. 5 seconds until the ion cannon fires. Darkos called out. "Get us closer." Elara barked. The adrenaline surged through her, pushing her beyond the fear. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for everything humanity had worked for. They couldn't afford to fail. The Vanguard bucked violently as it tore through the line of debris, and Elara's eyes never left the Eclipse as it grew closer, the massive warship now within a few hundred meters. The countdown continued. "Now!" Elara shouted, and the crew sprang into action. Zane executed a series of sharp, evasive maneuvers, narrowly dodging an incoming barrage of laser fire that tore through the void behind them. They were within striking distance now. As the ion cannon's blast illuminated the vast expanse of space, Elara saw her chance. Bring us in under their belly! Elara yelled. Zane hit the thrusters, pushing the Vanguard to the limit. The ship barreled beneath the Eclipse, the Syndicate's largest warship unable to track them at such a close range. As they passed beneath the flagship, Elara's mind was already several steps ahead. This was it. If they could get to the underside of the Eclipse and breach its hull, they could take out the ion cannon, once and for all. Prepare for a hard docking, Elara commanded. The Vanguard shuddered as they pulled up to the Eclipse's underbelly. The Syndicate flagship was massive, its hull covered in thick, metallic armor and a maze of weapons turrets. But it was vulnerable here, in this one area. A small maintenance hatch, barely visible to the naked eye, was their target. A single breach would allow them access to the core of the Eclipse's weapon systems. Zane guided the Vanguard with precision, aligning the ship perfectly with the hatch. The moment they made contact, the docking clamps shot out, securing the ship. Elara barely had time to think before the team was already moving, their weapons in hand as they prepared for what was to come. "We're in," Elara said, the words almost surreal in her own ears. She could feel the weight of history bearing down on them. Now the fun part, Zane grinned, but there was no humor in his expression. He knew the danger they were in. The team rushed out of the Vanguard and into the Syndicate flagship. The interior was cold, sterile, and incredibly hostile. The corridors were lined with advanced security systems, but the crew of the Vanguard was prepared for this. Every twist and turn was calculated, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the Eclipse's weapons systems. "Close your gaps," Elara ordered as they moved through the narrow, dark hallways. "We don't know who or what's waiting for us." They passed through a set of reinforced doors and into a control room, its walls lined with holoscreens that displayed tactical information. Before them stood the heart of the Eclipse's weaponry, a massive power core that fed energy directly into the ion cannons. "Breach it," Elara said to Lieutenant Darkos, who had already begun working on the door to the central chamber. With a sharp hiss, the door slid open, revealing a cavernous room filled with power conduits and heavy machinery. The EMP blast had disabled many of the ship's systems, but the heart of the Eclipse was still operational. Their mission was clear: disable the ion cannon and shut down the warship's ability to fire. Elara glanced at Zane. "We're on a timer. Get to the core. We disable the cannon, and we get out." Zane gave her a sharp nod. "Understood." They set to work, hacking into the ship's systems, wiring explosives and EMP devices to destabilize the power core. The timer counted down in the background, the seconds ticking away. As the final sequence was initiated, alarms began to blare throughout the Eclipse. "They know we're here," Zane growled. "We've been compromised." Elara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. They had no time left. "Let's finish this," she said. With the final push, the ion cannon was disabled, and the Eclipse's ability to fire was completely neutralized. The explosion that followed would send ripples through the entire Syndicate fleet. "Time to go," Elara said, her voice resolute. The team turned and ran back to the Vanguard, knowing they had just secured humanity's first major victory over the Syndicate. But the war was far from over. The Syndicate would come back stronger than ever. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The Vanguard blasted out of the heart of the Eclipse's hull with barely a second to spare. The explosion they had triggered in the Syndicate flagship's power core sent shockwaves throughout the entire fleet, throwing the enemy ships into disarray. Alarms blared across the Vanguard as Elara Voss gripped the helm, her mind already focused on the next move. "Zane, take us to maximum speed," she ordered, her voice sharp. "We need to get back to Earth. The Syndicate will come for us in full force, and we can't afford to waste any time." Zane's fingers flew across the console, pushing the Vanguard to its limits. The ship roared through space, its stealth systems engaged, but Elara knew the danger wasn't over. The Eclipse was just one ship in the Syndicate's vast arsenal. The real challenge was what was waiting for them when they returned to Earth, the full wrath of the Syndicate's war machine. As the Vanguard sped through the cold void, the crew gathered in the command center, the mood somber. Victory had been hard-won, but it had come at a price. The EMP strike on the eclipse had been successful, but their enemies would learn from this. Humanity had just made its first real mark in the galaxy, and it wouldn't go unnoticed. "Captain, we've got a problem," Lieutenant Darkos said, her eyes glued to the scanner. "Multiple enemy ships closing in fast. It looks like they've regrouped." Ilara turned to face her. "How fast?" "Very fast. They've got reinforcements," Darkos replied. "A whole fleet is on our tail, and the eclipse is preparing for another assault." The room fell silent as the implications set in. The Syndicate was not going to let this act of defiance slide. Earth's location was no longer a secret, and the full force of the Syndicate would descend upon them. Their only hope was to make it back to Earth and rally their people before the enemy arrived in full force. "Are we close to Earth?" Ilara asked. Zane glanced at the coordinates on the display. "Just a few more hours. We're almost there. Then it's time to show the galaxy what humanity is made of," Ilara said, her voice filled with unwavering determination. "We're not running anymore. We're standing our ground." The Vanguard began its final descent toward Earth's atmosphere, the planet's blue and green surface gleaming in the distance. Ilara knew that the Syndicate would be close behind, and they had no time to waste. The moment they entered Earth's orbit, humanity's fate would be decided. The crew had to act fast. Earth's military forces had been severely depleted during the earlier invasion, and they had no real defense against the Syndicate's overwhelming strength. But what humanity lacked in sheer numbers, they made up for in resilience, ingenuity, and the fire to survive. It was time to turn the tables. "Prepare for planetary defense," Ilara commanded. "Activate all systems. We're going to need every weapon we have to defend Earth." As the Vanguard entered Earth's atmosphere, it was met with an unexpected sight. A series of human-made defense platforms, once thought obsolete, were now fully operational, their weapons primed and ready. Earth's remaining military personnel had been quietly working to rebuild their forces, knowing that the day of reckoning was coming. Now, with the Syndicate's fleets closing in, humanity's last line of defense was ready. "We're not alone," Zane said, his eyes wide with realization. "Humanity doesn't stand alone," Ilara replied, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We've been underestimated, and now the Syndicate will learn what happens when you push humanity too far." The battle to defend Earth was about to begin, and the Syndicate was about to face an entirely new kind of enemy, one that would not kneel, not surrender, and not give up. The Vanguard was just the beginning. Humanity had awakened, and now it was time for the galaxy to witness the true power of a people who had nothing left to lose. On the edge of Earth's orbit, the Syndicate's fleet loomed large. Their ships, once symbols of unrivaled power, were about to face a new era of resistance. The Vanguard and Earth's newly formed defense forces had already begun to form a strategy, knowing that their strength lay in their unity. The Syndicate's commanders watched as the eclipse, their pride and joy, suffered damage from the EMP blast. They knew the humans had struck them hard, but they still underestimated the full extent of humanity's resilience. "Focus all fire on the Vanguard," a Syndicate commander growled, his eyes burning with rage. "If we destroy them, the rest of their forces will scatter. Earth will fall." But they were wrong. The Vanguard's crew wasn't just a symbol of humanity's defiance. They were the first wave of a growing movement, one that was ready to take the fight to the Syndicate in ways they could never have imagined. As the Syndicate fleet closed in, Earth's surface erupted with a series of defensive barrages. Missiles launched, energy beams flashed through space, and the once unimaginable happened. Humanity had risen to face the overwhelming might of the Syndicate, and they were not going down without a fight. "We're about to make history," Ilara whispered to herself as she stared out of the viewport. "This is our time." And with that, humanity's fight for survival entered its most critical phase. The day had come for the Syndicate to learn the hard truth: humanity was no longer just a target. They were a force to be reckoned with. The battle above Earth was nothing short of cataclysmic. The skies churned with the roar of explosions and the hum of laser fire as the Syndicate's fleet, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, found themselves facing the full fury of humanity's might. The vanguard had led the charge, but it was Earth's growing resistance that turned the tide. From the remnants of Earth's military to civilians who had long awaited this moment, the call to arms had been answered. Ilara Voss stood at the helm of the vanguard, her eyes fixed on the chaotic scene unfolding before her. The Syndicate had underestimated humanity's unity and resilience, and now they were paying the price. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over. "Captain," Lieutenant Darkos reported, her voice tense. "We've knocked out several of their flagship support ships, but the Eclipse is still operational. Its weapons are powering back up." Ilara's jaw tightened. The Eclipse had been a symbol of Syndicate power, and if they couldn't disable it completely, Earth's victory would still hang in the balance. They needed to finish this. "Zane, take us in," Ilara ordered. "We're going to take down the Eclipse once and for all." Zane nodded, his hands flying over the controls. The vanguard shot forward, weaving through a hail of enemy fire as it darted toward the Eclipse. The Syndicate flagship was enormous, its hull littered with weapons emplacements and defenses, but it was the heart of their fleet. If they destroyed it, the rest of the Syndicate would crumble. "Enemy fire incoming!" Zane called out, his voice strained as the ship rocked under the assault. "Shields holding, but just barely." Ilara's mind raced. They didn't have much time. The Syndicate's reinforcements were arriving, and their overwhelming numbers would eventually wear down humanity's defenses. This was the final strike. "Get us inside," Ilara commanded. "Target their weapons systems, now." The vanguard twisted and turned, dodging enemy fire as it closed the distance with the Eclipse. The sheer scale of the Syndicate's flagship was staggering, but Ilara had no intention of backing down. Her crew was ready for this. Humanity was ready. With a final maneuver, Zane dove the vanguard beneath the Eclipse, flying into a gap between its hull and the remaining enemy vessels. The Syndicate flagship's weapons turrets attempted to track them, but the vanguard was too fast, too agile. Zane brought them into a firing position beneath the Eclipse, where the ship's critical power cores were located. "Fire!" Ilara shouted. Lieutenant Darkos activated the ship's primary weapon systems. The Vanguard's cannons unleashed a torrent of fire, pounding into the weak spot beneath the Eclipse's hull. The Syndicate flagship shuddered violently as the energy from the Vanguard's blasts tore into its core, causing a massive explosion to ripple across the massive ship. But the Eclipse wasn't done yet. The flagship's command center remained intact, its central core still brimming with energy. They had to go deeper. Ilara knew they needed to finish what they had started. This wasn't just about disabling the ship, this was about sending a message to the Syndicate and every other galactic power that humanity would not be subjugated. "We're going in," Ilara said grimly. "Prepare for a boarding operation. We take control of their command center." The Vanguard's crew moved with precision, knowing the gravity of the situation. They had been through hell already, but this was the final push. As the Vanguard docked with the Eclipse, Ilara led the charge, her team following closely behind. They boarded the Syndicate flagship with military precision, tearing through the enemy's corridors and fighting their way toward the central command. The Syndicate forces fought back fiercely, but they were disorganized and demoralized. The shock of the Vanguard's assault had thrown them into disarray. It wasn't long before Ilara and her team breached the command center, where the last line of defense awaited them. The Syndicate commander, a towering alien figure, stood in front of a bank of control panels, his eyes filled with hatred. "You humans think you can defeat us?" he sneered, his voice booming in the tense room. Ilara stepped forward, her expression steely. "We don't think. We know." With a swift motion, she activated the ship's control systems, taking over the Eclipse's command center. The flagship systems faltered, its weaponry going offline one by one. The Syndicate had lost its grip on the Eclipse, and the tide of the battle began to shift. The commander snarled, but his resolve was faltering. "You'll never defeat the Syndicate. We are everywhere. Ilara's eyes burned with fury. Not anymore. She gave the order to destroy the Eclipse's core. It was a final act of defiance. The enemy flagship began to implode, and within minutes, the once mighty Eclipse was nothing more than a smoldering wreck. Back aboard the Vanguard, the crew watched the destruction unfold on their screens. Humanity had struck a blow that would echo through the galaxy for generations. The Syndicate, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been shattered. As the Vanguard pulled away from the wreckage, Ilara looked out into the vast expanse of space. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy had just learned what humanity was capable of, and the tides were shifting. Earth was no longer a backwater planet, it was a symbol of resistance, a beacon for the oppressed, and the catalyst for a new era. "We did it," Zane said, a grin on his face. Ilara nodded, but her expression was unreadable. "This is just the beginning. The Syndicate will regroup, but now they know we're coming for them. And when we strike next, it won't just be us, they'll face the entire galaxy. Humanity is no longer afraid." As the Vanguard sped toward Earth, the crew knew their victory had changed the fate of the universe forever. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had stood tall, defied the odds, and proven to the galaxy that no force, no matter how mighty, could ever crush the spirit of a determined people. The reckoning had begun.